Okay, so good evening, guys, and welcome to another episode of the Racing Line podcast. Tonight we've got something a little bit different again for you. Rather than doing a review on any racing, we've got an interview with a young Australian racer, someone who has a lot of insight into the modern world of motorsport, and also taking the jump from karting into motorsport, and that's Aaron Cameron, TCR driver from GRM. Welcome to the show, mate. Thanks for giving us your time. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to our chat.
Thanks, mate. Harry, you wanna kick us off, mate?
Yep. So I guess we'd just like to start off by asking, what's your earliest motor racing memory? Like, what started it all for you?
My first one that literally comes to mind in my immediate career would be going to the local track, which is Oakley for me, and I had a family friend who showed me around the track, and it was some big junior Top Guns meeting. And yeah, saw what was going on, loved it, and I thought, wow, I want to get involved in this. I want to get a go-kart for starters, and then sort of take it from there. And yeah.
Yeah, cool. And how young were you when you started karting?
I think I was like 11 and a half. So I started relatively, I'd say, late compared to a lot of guys that I know that started at sort of 7 or 8.
And we interested in like motorsport before that, or it was kind of just like you were exposed to the go-kart and that kind of kicked it off? Or, I mean, were you watching supercars as a kid, or, you know, staying up late for the F1 with dad? Like, you know, that's a pretty common story for a lot of people that get into it. Was that part of your experience as well?
Yeah, always liked supercars. My parents used to have got some old, like, historic cars. So even from a very young age, we're always at racetracks doing sort of demonstrations / my mum would race one of the cars. So I was, always around the racetrack, and always thought I'd probably end up getting into it. And then bloodline-wise, I'm the great nephew of Harry Firth, who used to run the whole dealer team.
Wow.
Back all those years ago. So it's sort of like, yeah, it was probably always going to happen that I was going to get into racing.
Yeah, right. Cool. Has a professional career always kind of been the dream since that, you know, light bulb moment?
It's always been high up there. But enjoyment factor is really high up there for me. Like, if I don't enjoy doing it, there's no point like doing it. So I still enjoy doing it a lot. So there's been times where I haven't, but yeah, we still love doing it. So I'll continue on for as long as I can.
I guess another, interesting thing before we kind of go into your, motorsport journey is, like, who's Aaron Cameron away from the tracks? Obviously, you're racing for GRM now, and they kind of have a history of, taking drivers on board, but then the drivers always, working with the team, or kind of, doing some kind of apprenticeship while they're, racing for that team. Is that a similar, story for yourself as well?
Initially, that was the plan, and I was going to do a fabrication apprenticeship at GRM, and I was starting that, and then COVID hit. They had to stop work for a while. I needed other work, so I started doing some stuff with the concreting company, and next minute, I think I've just clicked over a year or so with them doing concreting. So, and not looking back at this stage, like, it's something completely different to motorsport, which is, I enjoy, because it is a break from it all, because there's a lot going on. And sometimes when you're around motorsport, like, every day, it can get a bit sort of overwhelming, or overrated. So I just probably got a bit more of the enjoyment factor once I sort of stepped away a bit from the day-to-day stuff.
Probably one of the better traits to have if you want to stay fit as well.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's really hard on the back, but it is good. It's outdoors. I get a good tan now, hopefully with summer. like really good sock tan. And
Don't worry,
yeah,
mate. We don't
it's
see
good.
it with the overalls.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Just the guys in the truck when we're getting changed are all like, "Oh, Jesus, you are white."
So it's all pretty, fun and games. It's all good, and obviously when I watched that video on YouTube now of you at Bathurst, sprinting between the TCR and the XL. Now I understand, why it seemed relatively easy for you. But going into obviously karting, so you've told us about your first experience with karting, and then how did that karting journey evolve for you? Obviously starting at a slightly later age, and then just talk us through your development through the categories, and then obviously you're pretty successful at the end of your karting career with a few KZ championships as well. But what was that whole experience like?
It was awesome. I loved karting, and I still do love karting because it's just something you can do by yourself or with your friends, family. I suppose I probably I started late, and then another different thing I suppose about my career is because my dad is actually, I think they call it legally blind now, so he can't see. So it's always been my whole, and that's since I was born. So pretty much. So I've had a different career where to do anything, has to be me, my dad, my mum has to take us, or we've always usually had to get a helper or like a full-time mechanic in to just help us to get to tracks and that. So it's always been a bit of a different career, I'd say, I've had than a lot of drivers. But I think that also helps that, yes, my dad knows a lot about mechanical motorsport, that side of it, but to get an outside opinion for a lot of my career has been really good as well, where we can and just sort of pick a bit of his brain, pick a bit of our brain, just sort of mash them all together. I think really helped with our progression because we were a few years behind everyone. There's a lot of catching up to do, and then we sort of got it all together towards the end of my junior career. And then once we went to seniors in KZ, again, we sort of good for the start, then lost away a bit in the middle of my sort of KZ career, and then got it all back together at the end. So it's been good. I've loved it, but it certainly is a bit of a different point to a lot of drivers.
So when you obviously talk about your father and obviously your story, I mean, a lot of, children, when they obviously are doing a sport, they always have that, well, a lot of the times they have that father figure that kind of either pushes them into it or is obviously, a big part of that journey. But with your story, was it kind of, and obviously with what you said earlier about you wanting to get into karting when you had that first experience with it, I'm assuming that kind of meant that you were really kind of pushing the karting, and then you obviously had to set up, the family and team around what you wanted to achieve, obviously because of your dad's blindness. Is that kind of the case?
Yeah, I mean, my dad pushed it a fair bit initially, I'd say, with getting it all together. And then we did have a stage, I think probably when I was 13, 14, where it started the new season, that I wasn't in his, probably in both our eyes, showing enough interest and didn't want to do it, and he was doing everything at that stage. And then pretty much just stopped doing it all. I'm like, oh, when are we going testing? When are we doing this? And that was probably the best thing he ever did, that he didn't do anything for probably a good month. I sort of let it slide by. And then I'm like, well, why aren't we doing anything? And he just pretty much said that if you want to do it, you've got to go out there and either do it all yourself, start working on the go-karts, or at least start helping him with bits and pieces. So I think that was probably the best thing for me at that stage, to really start actually doing stuff myself. And it's helped me all the way through now for the rest of my sort of career so far.
And at that stage, was that kind of still local karting, or were you already kind of racing, in the AKC at that stage?
No, I think that was still sort of state level when we were doing sort of local / regional championships. At that, not much interstate. I think probably the year after that is when we started to go more national with the whole thing, and get even more serious.
Yeah. Okay. So then obviously, I don't know if there's any karters listening and they obviously know your name. It's pretty synonymous with the JC kart and that fluoro helmet that you used to wear. But how did that whole experience come about? Obviously, hooking yourself up with the JC kart, and then, I mean, you're probably then an ambassador for them for 3 or 4 years, wouldn't it have been at least? Or one of their lead drivers.
Yeah, it was a cool experience. Like, we did the first year in KZ with the team I'd been with for a few years in juniors, which was DPE Car Technology, and then they didn't want to run the race team at such an intense level, I'd say, going forward. So I was sort of looking at other options. My mechanic, he was from Queensland, and he's really good mates with John Target, who was doing the whole JC kart program, I'd say, and gets along really good with JC. So yeah, it sort of all come about through there, and then it all happened pretty quick towards the start of that year, and then from there it sort of just blossomed. We had some decent results in the first sort of year. That was the cool thing about being part of a proper manufacturer, that if we wanted a different chassis or we wanted to try stuff, it was all just do it. Like, it was really cool. And then James also helped me with I think I was racing the 286 series. So yeah, with the sort of deal we'd done, he'd help me with track walks and a bit of preparation for the 86 series races, which were on the supercar weekends. So it sort of all worked in really good. And then we finally got the championship in 2018, which was sort of a nice ending. None of us we were going into that third year, which I sort of figured was going to be my last in KZ.
Yeah.
With relatively low expectations, because we weren't putting as much effort in, focusing on other things, and sort of everything just sort of fell into place. The one year that we were still trying, but weren't doing as much testing sort of stuff. It was more of a lesser effort, and somehow we ended up winning the thing. It was weird.
So by the time you're at that stage, with JC card and things like that, from a financial point of view, were you having to put as much, money in the karting, or with the factory, drive, so to speak, was that kind of taken care of to, a greater extent?
A fair chunk. I suppose all the way through karting, we could never afford to go with, say, the best teams that do all the testing and spend all the money on tyres, engines, and all that.
Yeah.
So all the way through, we've been helped out from different teams, and it was the same in this sort of JC Cup case. They did as much as they could for us, which was great. And I tried to return the favour as well with any of the young kids that were in the team. Tried to sort of help people where I could. Obviously, I didn't know a hell of a lot about cadets, or like the young 7 to 10-year-olds, sort of how to help them effectively. But it was good. Like, that was some of the more fun years. It was more relaxed at JC for them few years a lot more of a family environment with the team. So it was fun. It was really fun them years, and yeah.
And obviously, you said in that championship year where you're kind of looking, forward to other things, and a little bit less effort was kind of put into the karting. Was that already because you were, thinking about, what your transition plan would be, into, car racing? And I also just had a side question. So with obviously the JC connection and their affiliation with, Paralyn and things like that, at any stage during your karting career, was there ever like the thought of, trying to get overseas to Europe and try your hand at it?
Yeah. From the European side of it, I went across in 2015 and did 5 or 6 races.
Oh, yeah.
Which was, again, really cool. Like, I was 15 years old, traveling to like 4 or 5 different countries. Had some pretty good results for what was when we just used to go over there, rock up on race weekends and do the best we could. It was pretty cool considering kids over there, they spend a good week testing at circuits beforehand, and they've probably already been there multiple times before that. So like we come like second and thirds at the Italian and German national championship rounds that I'd done over there, qualified top 10 at the 2 world titles, which I did. Like it's for when I look back, they are some pretty cool results.
Yeah.
Like for the preparation testing, we weren't necessarily with the best teams. So yeah, they were some pretty cool times, but I just never really had the money to really have success over there. You've got to you've got to go over there full time, do all the testing and preparation, do all the races. And some of them guys spend the money they were spending. We could do a really cool program in Australia racing cars, which is at that stage I thought a lot more cool, but the same thing, it's still racing, so it's still all be fun. And then even in Paralympic, we did the World Championship in the KZ karts. But yeah, we just had a few things that weekend that didn't exactly go away. I struggled a bit with the way the Paralympics set up their stuff compared to the JC. Just the small little differences that were making a rather large difference that weekend.
Yeah.
So
just obviously to finish off on the karting, because it's a pretty interesting sport. I mean, there's very rarely. Well, I wouldn't say there's a whole lot of sports in general where that much money is spent in relation to how much money people are spending in karting. Do you have any kind of hot takes or what's your overall opinion of the karting scene in Australia? I mean, I'm a sucker for it. I'm just karting at a club level, and you're putting some good money in it, and obviously the higher you go up, the more you're spending. And then obviously, it's definitely not the cheapest sport. But when you think about karting, is there anything that could be improved with the sport as a whole, to kind of obviously increase, the amount of people that are in the sport, or to make it more affordable for them, or, do you have any, insight into that?
Not so much. I think they've done a decent job in the last few years of trying to get the club level and state level back up and running. For a while there, I think everyone was going straight national championship way too early in their careers. Like they were and it was burning a lot of people's budgets, where when I started, you did your club days for a year, you did your state level for a couple of years, worked your way up, and it sort of fed the whole system, where now a lot of people are just going full-blown international championship, doing their week or so of testing before each round. And then families just don't have the money to keep doing all these other state rounds and club days and all that. So, and they've been doing some good jobs with restricting testing before rounds. So then they're not forced to go to club and state rounds, but instead of going testing, they're going racing more often and getting back to a bit more of the fun of racing, which is what club days and state stuff really is, rather than the nationals, where when you're testing and everyone's all serious, and it's just not as fun, I don't reckon. I love racing, not testing.
Yeah. I think I can kind of see that point, to be honest with you, because I don't know, even in New South Wales, we've obviously there's been a bit of an issue with Karting Australia and Karting New South Wales splitting. So I don't know how that's going to end up being resolved. But just from like a Karting New South Wales point of view, the whole club scene seems to have been reinvigorated, which is great to see. The numbers are up, and that's all awesome. It's just now a matter of seeing how they kind of reintegrate those higher levels of karting for those people as well. But going from your karting and then moving into your car racing career, what was the initial thought process there? So 2018, you say you win the championship, but you're already thinking about I assume, the transition. So what was that whole thought process like for you at that stage? And then how old were you also when you were obviously thinking about that transition plan?
I think from a young, like even young. So I moved to, I'd say we had a sort of a multi-year transition because we started the state Formula Ford in 2016, I'm pretty sure. So that was my first year in KZ. So we started it all quite early, doing a Formula Ford and KZ program. And then, yeah, I think it would have been probably 14, 15, you start thinking about what you're going to do, what's happening. And I think Formula 4 was starting up around then as well, which wasn't ever really on my radar. I never really wanted to do wings and slicks, especially at that sort of level.
You came third in the Victorian Championship I've got up here, which is, still pretty good at 2016.
Yeah, it was certainly a good year. Learnt a hell of a lot. Crashed a few times, which is what you do in Formula Ford, and made a canoe or so. So yeah, we had good times, and we sort of moved on the next year, looking at sort of doing a national Formula Ford, but then budget-wise, guys are spending a lot of money in Formula Ford with the testing and racing and all that. So we were sort of looking at doing a national, but then the Toyota 86 series come up, I think the year before, and that sort of took our eye and went, and because it is so cost effective, the promotional side of it is great. So we more went that way. We kept the Formula Ford. I think we did 2 national rounds, and we put a massive effort into the second one we did at Winton, which was a joint supercar weekend. So we put, I think we did at least 2 test days where we had like a full-on testing program of new tires, cold out the gate starts. Like it was a really, it's the most serious program we'd ever done to try and make sure that we were on it and fast and that we'd win Winton, which we did. And then it all went to plan. Was
that essentially just to get exposure on like the supercars weekend? Was that the thinking behind that?
Yeah. That was like, if there was a Formula Ford national round to win during the year, that was the one to win because it is in front of the supercars. And it all went according to plan, sort of thing. And this is all Formula Ford for us was all just me, my dad, and my uncle was my mechanic. Like in that year, the year before we ran with Ball and they were helping us, which is the manufacturer Spectrum. And then that year we just ran ourselves. That year we did a couple of rounds. We just did our own thing and it worked.
And you guys were funding that all yourselves as well, or you had some kind of sponsorship backing too?
That was all funding from ourselves.
Well,
so, and that's why we had to do it by ourselves, because otherwise we just couldn't afford to go with like a Sonic, because Sonic 100% are the best team out, but obviously it all costs money for Sonic to make a great team like that. So
for a team like Sonic, just as as an example, how much money would you be spending to do or putting into a season with that team if you were going to race for them? Like what kind of figures are we talking about for a Formula Ford championship?
I honestly don't know figures currently, or even can't remember what they were doing back then, but it was sort of double what we'd spend. Like our expense wise was half what they would have. Like all our mechanics, like it was all just a family thing. I didn't have data. Like they've at least got an engineer on each car, mechanic on each car, all the massive trucks to take all the cars around. So yeah, expense wise, I think they were a good probably double what we would spend as a family doing it ourselves on a reasonable budget, but still cutting corners, let's say.
Yeah.
Go.
After you, Harry. After you, mate.
Oh, I was just going to ask, looking at the 2017 season, you went from Formula Ford to 86s to Utes. Did it require a lot of driving style changes to handle the different cars and get the maximum speed out of it, I guess?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, especially going to the V8 Ute for the last 2 rounds there, or for not the last 2 rounds, whatever the 2 rounds I did were, it was quite difficult because they are such a weird car. They've got the brake booster, but then they don't have ABS, so they can lock brakes really easy. Yeah, I found that really challenging. 86 wasn't bad because you've got the ABS and they're on an R-Spec tire, like you can just throw them around. So, but yeah, definitely V8 Utes was, and that first time I've driven a V8 was something very new to me.
They're fun to drive. They seem so odd to watch. Just on the TV. Are they a fun car or a fun Ute to drive those things?
Yeah. I mean, I like anything to drive really, as long as it's reasonably fast. I don't mind.
Slippery rear ends.
Yeah, I haven't had many negative experiences in car racing really.
Just when you roll those Utes, mate.
Yeah. That I suppose that was probably up there for not a great one, but at the same time, I got to roll the Ute. First time I rolled a car, so that was pretty exciting.
So obviously, you've driven a bunch of cars between the age of 2016 and then 2018. We spoke about the Utes, 86s production cars, and then 2019 the TCRs obviously introduced in Australia. After a lot of success globally. How did you get into that field, and what opportunities were opened up for you to make that grid?
A lot of my opportunities in 2019 were actually opened up by Ryan McLeod, who, previous previously owned Racer Industries now as well, and Mark Cars Australia. I'd done, and I met him through JC Karts. So a lot of it come from, I guess, back at JC Karts, and then a lot of the current stuff's through Ryan McLeod, who's helped me a lot with the initial Mark car drive at Queensland Raceway, which I did well at, and then he helped me get over to Barcelona to do a 24-hour race in a TCR car, which was like the week before, all real last minute stuff.
Did you race at Bathurst, the 12-hour in one of their cars as well?
Yeah, and then did the Mark II, the first one of them. What was that, 2017 or 2018?
2018.
Yeah. So I did the first one of that with him. Like he really helped me a lot from sort of the start of, from around the 2017 when I started with JC Karts, and from then on, made a few calls for me for the 2019 season to try and really get me in a TCR car, which was awesome. And even then, to get me in a GRM, he opened some doors there initially, so it was good.
And obviously, you're probably at a point where I don't know, tell me if I'm wrong, but everyone, every young person, like driver in Australia, loves supercars and is interested in kind of trying to get there as as the goal. Is that kind of the same for you as well? And obviously you've moved into TCR, but was there any consideration into kind of Super 3, Super 2? Or, I mean, it is quite expensive categories still, but were they considerations as well when you were going through that transition into racing?
Yes, I suppose there were considerations, and there's plenty of teams that come up to you and want to run you and all that. But when they say they want to run you in supercars, usually it comes with a price tag, and all them price tags were not anywhere near what we could spend. Like supercars is a really, it's an expensive category, but they're man-made sort of machines, so I can understand why they're expensive, but it was just never really in our budget. That's why we were sort of doing a lot of sidestepping to try and get to supercars. But now I'm in TCR, and I'm pretty happy there, and there's opportunities globally in TCR that could come of something, but you never know in motorsport really what's around the corner.
Yeah, that was actually the next question that I was going to ask you, because I mean, obviously, it's been interesting. I mean, the first year of TCR in Australia was, it kind of caught everyone by storm. It was people took to it pretty well straight away. And then the last 2 seasons, I don't think it's really been able to build as much traction because of obviously COVID and things like that. But there's obviously, quite a lot of TCR racing globally, Europe, America, all over the place. Is that a reasonable proposition for you moving forward, something that you're looking into, actively? And if that's the case, then once, like, obviously now that you're established in TCR, are you still required to bring some kind of funding to the category, or if you wanted to go overseas, is that something that would need to be taken into consideration as well, or is it kind of a lot more sustainable kind of racing?
It's certainly more sustainable in Australia. It's still, I mean, car racing is always going to be expensive. So, yeah, it's certainly a lot more sustainable than supercars. For us, GRM helped me out a fair bit. Going internationally is a bit of a question mark. It's been super hard to do anything. Like, I can't leave the country without doing the 14-day quarantine till sort of now-ish. So yeah, the original plan when I started with GRM was to try and push and go overseas with it all. But then COVID sort of really mucked up TCR in Australia and globally, but mainly us, sort of thing. So certainly in the future, I'll be looking at trying to get over and do a few races here and there, like some TCR Europe races would be really nice. But it's just trying to make it happen cost effectively, and a track. You got to try and pick the track for depending what car you're going to be in. With the way the BOP works, you don't want to be going over there and get hit pretty hard on BOP and not go to a track that the car's not good at, sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And just in general, how are you finding obviously the category? I mean, it's just from a fan's point of view, it looks awesome to watch. I mean, earlier in the year at Bathurst, and then even at Eastern Creek, I mean, the racing is awesome. The field, it's full of. I mean, the fact that Chaz Mostert is racing in it as well, like a current supercars driver, a lot of ex-supercars drivers that are still really quick, and there's obviously a lot of young talent as well. How are you enjoying that whole category?
It's awesome. Like, it's good having the name people in it. Like, if there was just people like me, Jordan Cox, I suppose Ben Bogman has got a bit of a name behind him, but a lot of young guys in it, you probably wouldn't get the fans as into it. So it's good to have guys like Chaz and Lee Holsworth in it to race against them. Caruso, and racing them it's different to racing a Jordan Cox. Like, they're probably we're good, but they're probably a step above in the racing department in some circumstances. They really do show their experience at times, and that's why when you beat them, it is a hell of a lot more satisfying.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, even when you just think about the race that you had with Chaz Mostert at the Mountain earlier in the year, I mean, you're the only one that could really hold a flame to him for that race, and that was awesome to see. But then just transitioning slightly, so I mean, we see in a number of series around the world, Nürburgring 24-hour, the Creventic 24-hour series that race GT3 cars and those TCR cars together. I mean, and obviously the TCR and Australian GT calendars are kind of converged now as well. Do you reckon there's any possibility that we could see a TCR class at the Bathurst 12-hour, anytime soon, racing as a separate category to the GT3s? And how do you think that would go?
I'm just thinking about lap time wise. I think it could work. it'd be very exciting for us
Yeah.
in TCR, but the speed difference is hard because Bathurst, there's so limited overtaking spots over the top.
Yeah.
I think that's why they've clamped down a bit on the speed of cars, and the GT3 guys that are coming out, they're not just AM guys. There's a lot of pro teams. It's part of the Intercontinental GT World Challenge, I think it is.
Yeah.
So there's such a high level of cars there that I think they've got to try and make sure it's mainly GT3 or marked cars that aren't too far behind and not know their place, but they sort of try and stay out the way as best they can. So it'd be cool if they did it, but too many cars at Bathurst can get pretty wild, because you'd want to have a good at least 5 or 6 TCR cars on the grid to make it interesting for TCR cars.
Yeah, that's true.
Top of the mountain would be pretty frightening too, with
There's so much
cars lapping
blind
at
stuff,
different
eh?
speeds. Yeah.
Exactly.
So obviously we've seen, Will Brown go from TCR. He raced obviously in Super 2 as well, but he's taken the transition from TCR into supercars. Do you have any insight into how much credence, young TCRs or young TCR drivers are given into relation to supercar seats? So obviously supercars as the Super 3, Super 2 to kind of project young drivers into the main game, but is any credence given to those young performing drivers in TCR, by those teams?
I don't know specifics about, but I think supercar teams are always looking at every category that's out there. Like for myself, I've out of the blue a week and a half ago, I got a call from Walkinshaw and Andretti United asking me if I wanted to come and do a driver evaluation day, which I did last Tuesday. So that sort of stuff that I've had no contact with them in the past, like the only way they could have known of me is through my TCR results. So I suppose, it does have some, they've seen what I can do on a TCR. Now they want to put me in a supercar and see what I can do there. So that was pretty cool. So I guess it does have a level of showing what you can do to them. But as I've experienced now, the TCR car to a supercars is a big difference.
Yeah.
And if you're not experienced to that, it's a lot more of a difficult jump than most would expect.
Yeah, that was actually one of my next questions. I mean, how different? I mean, obviously they're completely different concepts as cars, and we can talk about the different driving natures of those cars. But how much of a jump is it, from the TCR car, which is still seems like it's pretty zippy, to get into a supercar. And actually, before I answer that question, will it change, do you think, with the Gen 3?
I don't know a hell of a lot about the Gen 3, but I think it could come a bit more back towards the TCR if they're losing aero. Like the current cars have a lot of, for me, it had a lot of understeer and wasn't super wild, like in the rear, where TCR, it's always just trying to control the rear. So I think if they take the aero out, maybe they'll have a bit more of a looser car, and it could make it a bit more like TCR. But considering TCR has paddle shifts, it's auto blip, it let you just left foot brake, and it does it all for you. But more on like the down changing, it's quite easy. Where you get you get in a, what the hell was my last story? You get in a supercar and it does it like you've got a heel toe and blip, and it's just, there's a lot going on, sort of thing.
Have you done your car battery, mate?
I haven't done my car battery. I think it did go into battery saver mode. But I don't know what went on there. But yeah, I'm just trying to keep the lighting half good in here. Now it's getting dark.
That's all right. We're more audio than visual, but that's actually quite interesting. And obviously I've been asking a few questions about TCR and the supercar field and things like that. But with the growth of TCR, at the same time, we're seeing, dwindling numbers in Super 2 and Super 3, kind of to the point now where they are running together. Is there, any, chance do you think that we could see some kind of amalgamation between the categories, with supercars being obviously the pinnacle, and then, having TCR as a kind of feeder for that category? Obviously, they're operated by, different companies that have, contradicting interests, but with, the nature of the sport at the moment, do you see any value in that?
I'd see it as very unlikely. Just supercars needs to keep the Super 2, Super 3 running and progressing, and especially at the moment when all the supercar teams are trying to flog off their Gen 2 cars in a year's time.
Yeah,
there needs to be somewhere for them to go. So it'd be hard to even have TCR as a feeder category. I don't think supercars would push it, because all the teams need Super 2 and Super 3 to be able to push their old cars to, and all their parts, not just the cars, the parts that they have spent so much time and money developing.
Yeah.
They've got to be able to sort of get some return on that when they're trying to, instead of taking it to the scrap metal yard, I guess.
That's a really good point. And this is you probably can't answer this question, but I thought I'd throw it in there anyway. Since you're kind of, working at GRM, boots to the ground now, any chance that we could see a GRM car back in the supercars paddock with, with Gen 3 if it becomes more affordable?
I mean, this is in no ways any official communication from GRM, but I don't see it happening at the moment. They're very invested in TCR, TA2, and then the S5000s there. So I can't see them getting back into supercars, but I didn't see them doing the wild card in last year.
Yeah.
So yeah, you never know. But at the moment, I think they've got a good plan for the future with TCR.
No, awesome.
So,
Can I just point out though, what a team to test for in supercars, Walkinshaw and Andretti.
Oh, awesome.
That's amazing.
It was a very unexpected phone call. So I'm very grateful to them. And it was just it was very unexpected. And I've been offered a lot of times to go try out Super 2, Super 3 cars, and I'd sort of turn them down. But when you get offered a chance like that, there was no way I was going to say no.
That's awesome.
Even with just kind of the whole, what are they called? Not the wild card drivers, but the second driver that race at the enduro rounds. I mean, for a young driver trying to obviously get in the category. I mean, we saw it with Tom Randall as well. That's kind of and Will Brown with Erebus. That's kind of how he kind of proved that he was, good enough for the category, really. So that's awesome to hear. A few random questions just to finish off. Have you been following the Formula One this season?
Most of it.
Do you have a hot take for who will take out the championship?
I hope it's Verstappen, because I like Hamilton. He's clearly a freaking awesome driver, but he's won it a few years in a row now, so I wouldn't mind if Verstappen got up.
Yeah. None of us in this podcast like Hamilton, so you don't have to be politically correct about it. So
not at all. Not at all.
We're all hoping that Supermax can get it done. And the last question. This is the most important question. So earlier on, I made mention of your fluoro green and yellow JC helmet. That was freaking awesome. And one thing that we do talk about fairly regularly off the podcast are drivers that get rid of the visor, or the iridium visor, for the sun shield, and you've done that. That. What's the scientific reason behind it? Firstly, is it just heat and glare?
I suppose when you're in open wheeler or karts, of course you have to have the visor, and you have it down, you have a little bit of air coming in. But initially when I went into cars, had the visor down, and it gets hot in there, and then probably a couple of test days in, I just always had the visor flat stick all the way up.
Yeah.
So when I was getting my latest helmet, I was like, well, screw it. Like, why do I need a visor? Let's just get a peak, and then it's done. Like I push that up as far as I can because I don't like anything.
Okay.
I like to have nice wide open vision.
Okay.
So yeah, it's just, yeah. I mean, I got to drive an S5000 today at the test day for the first time. So that was not good because having a helmet with a peak on it, and I didn't have a visor with me. I had to borrow someone else's helmet so I could actually drive the car. So maybe I do need to go back to the visor just so I can drive anything.
Even just on, I think it's even just on like sex appeal. Like I think it's just sexier when you can't see a face.
Yeah, that is true. 100%.
But no, that was just a stupid question to enter. But we really appreciate you taking the time to jump on and have a bit of a chat with us. I mean, a lot of the the things that you brought up are actually quite interesting, and your whole motorsport journey, even though it's still in its infancy, really, it's quite good. And we're obviously, the reason why we need to kind of message you in the first place was because we're fans, and I've been following that name since it was kind of recognized in karting. So we wish you all the best, and hopefully is there any more TCR races this year? Are they racing at Eastern Creek or Bathurst to end the year, or?
We were meant to be racing at the last Eastern Creek, but now we're doing Bathurst to finish the year.
Well,
Nice.
Well, that's a better place to go to anyway, mate.
Yeah.
A lot more fun. But we wish you all the best of luck to finish out the season. Thanks for taking the time, and hopefully your battery's still good once you get off this call, mate. Thanks a lot. We really appreciate it.
Thank you guys.
Thanks, mate. Appreciate it.
Cheers, mate. Thank you.
Yeah.